Welcome to the Module 8 lecture. We're going to talk about backup recovery and disaster planning. Our objectives are going to be disaster planning. We're going to use the identification area that requires disaster planning, creation of disaster recovery teams, and creation of disaster recovery policies. We're also going to talk about Windows backup and recovery, Windows backup considerations, the types of Windows backups, and the media rotation. First, you have to know what a disaster is when you plan for disaster recovery. So what is a disaster? Well, it's any scenario in which one or more essential systems, services, or applications cannot operate, and the prospects for quick recovery are less than hopeful. To ensure that operations can be restored as quickly as possible in a given situation, all critical network systems and applications need to have a clear disaster recovery plan. The worst case disaster does happen, and spending time beforehand to prepare helps bring the disaster to resolution. There are all kinds of certifications for disaster planning and recovery, and the biggest one is the CISSP certification. It does cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars to take, and it costs thousands of dollars to be trained for. So it is something that a lot of employers look to in larger companies. Some common responses to the need for disaster replanning is that this won't happen in our environment. It was a common refrain at one company until an unusual snowstorm caused their data center room to give way. Of course, when that happens, all the hardware that's inside the server room is going to go down, and it's possible it might even damage the backups if you're running backups at all. Another scenario is the business can live without that application or service. Another common refrain from an IT manager that thought the business didn't need access to one particular application. Unfortunately, this application ended up being business critical and was required for the company to operate. A lot of times, the people who are running the company don't realize what the staff uses to actually do their job. And one way to make sure that they understand this is, of course, to list all the different types of applications and who uses those applications, and run through a scenario where that application is unavailable to see what happens. Steps to begin planning for a disaster. Identification, establishment of incident and emergency response teams, creation of disaster planning and recovery policies, and testing disaster recovery procedures. The first step in disaster planning is to determine which network systems and applications need to have a disaster planning document created. Some examples that you may want to consider are file database and application servers, network hardware, physical security, that could be cameras, door locks, that kind of thing, data backup, whether on-site or off-site, fault tolerance, recovery plan, and power protection. When staffing for a disaster, most corporate environments establish two teams, an incident response team and an emergency response team. The membership of each team may consist of the same or similar personnel, however, their function is different. Under an incident response team, the primary role is to respond to security incidents, for example, an outbreak of a virus. It takes immediate action to safeguard the organization's information and documents the security issue in an after-action report. It also leads the effort to resolve any security problem. An emergency response team is different. Its primary role is to respond to service or system outages. For example, the failure of a critical service or application, or physical hardware failure. It takes immediate action to recover the system or service to restore normal operation as soon as possible. And this team takes the lead in documenting the issue. Good documentation is one of the keys to surviving a disaster in an IT organization. And when I say survive, it means that sometimes after a disaster, the IT staff is fired or replaced because they were unable to bring everything back up to where it should be within a reasonable amount of time. A disaster planning policy document should have the following items. So you're going to want to have a document that's all ready to go, that the principals in the company have access to, as well as yourself. responsibilities of the various members in each team, a phone roster with both home and cell phones, key contact information for vendors and facilities managers, notification procedures for operations personnel, escalation, and post-disaster documentation. Along with the policy, certain procedures should be written and practiced. Backup and restore procedures, UPS generator procedures, server rebuild procedures. This will definitely go a long way to helping you recover more quickly if you have practiced them. Besides having good planning and documentation, testing of the disaster plan is crucial. Your Windows Server environment represents a large investment of time, effort, and expense. That investment needs to be protected with a backup strategy to protect your environment in case disaster strikes and recovery is necessary. So at the beginning part of our lecture, we talked about the different types of response teams that are required to assist in recovery from a disaster. Now we're going to talk about actual physical backup and backup types for backing up data. Your backup strategy depends on the importance of the data the server stores, the frequency that data changes, the amount of data that the server stores, and the time allotted for backups to run. Most backup programs make use of a file or folder attribute called the archive bit. When a file is modified, the archive bit is set, telling the program that this file was modified and needs to be included in the backup job. When the backup job completes saving the file to tape or disk, the archive bit is then removed. You can actually see an archive bit in a file. So let's go ahead and do a directory here. Let's go back to the root of the C drive. And we'll go ahead and go into the inet pub folder. And let's go into and now we see some files. So if we want to see whether or not that archive bit is set, we can type the attrib command followed by the name of the file. And we can see that there's an A bit right here. So this is the archive bit, has been set. Once backup runs and you hit the same command, the A will actually disappear. It will no longer be there. If you go in and make a change to this file, the A will be back again, and the backup program knows it needs to back this file up one more time. All right, there's different backup types. We'll start with the most common one, which is the full backup. It's also called a normal backup. It's a full backup of all the files and folders you select regardless of the archive attribute setting. However, when the file is backed up, the archive attribute is turned off, which I just showed you. Another backup type is the incremental. An incremental backup is used to create a backup of all files that have changed since the last normal backup. It is a partial backup containing only the most recent changes. Like the full backup, the archive attribute is turned off when the file is backed up. A differential backup is very similar to incremental, except when the files are backed up, the archive attribute is not turned off. Like the incremental backup, the differential backup requires a full backup to be successful. There's also a copy and a daily backup. A copy backup is a full backup of all files you select regardless of the archive attribute setting. So it just doesn't even pay attention to the archive bit. It just backs up everything. A daily backup uses, instead of using the archive bit, it uses the date. So you can actually back up by date instead of by archive bit. So the full backup, use either incremental or differential with full backups, but not both. So when you do your lab and you're setting up your backups, make sure you don't choose both incremental and differential along with your full backup. So you can either do incremental backups for days 2 and 3. Backup 2 will back up changes since day 1, and the third backup will back up changes since day 2. So that's how an incremental works. Differential is a little different. It will back up changes since day 1, and then backup 3 will back up changes since day 1. So that's the basic difference between the two. It's easier if I show you in this graphic. So you can see if you decide to back up a full backup on Monday, then you do a incremental backup Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. An incremental backup on Tuesday will back up any files changed since Monday. The Wednesday backup will back up any files that have changed since Tuesday. Thursday's backup will back up any files that have changed since Wednesday, and Friday since Thursday. Differential backup works this way. On Tuesday, it'll back up any files that have changed since Monday. On Wednesday, it will back up any files that have changed since Monday. On Thursday, it'll back up any files that have changed since Monday. And on Friday, it'll back up any changes since Monday. So an incremental is a much smaller, faster backup because it only backs up what changed since the day before. Whereas the differential will back up since the last full backup and it will ignore what happened the day before. The differential, however, is better in that you don't have to have every other backup in order to do the restore. So if we have a file that goes bad on Thursday, we only need the Thursday backup and the Monday backup. Whereas an incremental, we need all backups in between. And if any backup is bad, the incremental restoration will fail. So one way is cheaper and faster, the other uses more hard drive space, is slower and costs more, but is more dependable. So differential and incrementals can work with full backups to provide faster backups on days you don't run a full backup. So they're both faster than running a full backup. It's just that one is faster than the other. So incremental backups is faster using less data because it only backs up data from the previous day. Differential are slower and use more data. You decide which one is better for you. You'll likely use a third-party backup solution with more features than Windows Server Backup, because Windows Server Backup will only do full and incremental and will only back up on the server itself. So you have to run separate backups for every single Windows server if you choose Windows Server Backup. A third-party one will allow you to back up all your servers from one location instead. So Windows Server Backup is not installed by default. It is a feature you need to add through Server Manager. Windows Server Backup no longer can back up to tape. It can back up to hard drives, DVDs, online, or network shares. It can only do full and incremental backups. Online backup is a great option for a secondary backup in case of fire or flood. It cannot be used as a primary backup solution because it's slow to upload and slow to download in an emergency situation. That may drive you crazy. It can be expensive and many do not offer bare metal restores. So fine, use online backup if you want, but make sure you do the local backup as your primary backup. Media rotation. As part of your backup strategy, you might want to use full backups to create monthly or quarterly full backups that are kept for extended periods. Media rotation is used to keep media for a period off-site. So you will want to have a Monday through Friday backup, possibly, maybe for multiple weeks. And at the end of the month, you take that end of the month Friday backup off-site. Maybe once a year, you take that off-site as well for an annual backup. So you get to Windows Server Backup by clicking on Tools, Windows Server Backup, and this opens up. And now we have the option, after this has already been installed through features, of course, we can choose a backup schedule, or we back up specific days of the week, or we can choose to back up once, which is what we'll do for our lab. So we choose Next. We can choose Full Server, or we can choose Custom. Next. We can add items. You can choose the C drive, you can choose the system state, or the bare metal recovery. Bare metal recovery is going to be one of the questions on your lab, so you'll need to find what the definition of that bare metal recovery is. So if we wanted to back up just one folder, we can just click on that, click OK, click Next. It's going to ask us, is this going to be a drive we're going to be backing up to locally, such as a DVD or a USB drive, or is this going to be a remote share on another server? Click Next. You can choose the destination. This is not going to be a destination we're going to want to use. And then choose Next and Finish, and it'll start to back up. At the end of that time, you'll want to do a screenshot of the completed backup. So in conclusion, we talked about disaster planning, identification of areas that require disaster planning, creation of disaster recovery teams and policies, Windows backup considerations, types of Windows backups, and media rotation.